question later. Sorry, I didn't.
Okay. Well, so Anawa, you had asked me a question about page speed. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. How important is, like, in general, page speed and optimizing page speed? I mean, I understand images and all of that, but beyond that, and specifically the Google page speed itself, but
Right.
also like speed in general.
Okay. Okay, great. So first of all, it's important to remember there are 300 ranking factors, and speed is one of them. But we don't know to what degree speed is the first most important issue, or the 200th, or where in between. But one thing we do know about speed as a metric is it's not really about speed. It's very people, when Google or people talk about page speed as a ranking factor, they're using a shorthand for what Google calls the 3 web core vitals. Okay, those 3 web core vitals. I mean, let me just put it this way. Google doesn't sit there with a stopwatch and check how long it takes a page to load, because that function is dependent upon internet connector, the browser, the computer that you're using, or the phone. If you're on 3G or 5G, Wi-Fi, Gigafiber. So the bot that is going into these websites to evaluate for ranking factors, well, that's pretty lightweight. And it's going through pretty fast servers, because it's not really going to load the page on the 3G network. So Google said, while they want pages to load fast, they're not measuring them by time. They're measuring them by these 3 web core vitals. The one of these is, oh, I should say, by fixing these 3 web core vitals, you will consequently have a faster website. And I just said it wrong there for a moment, because Google doesn't rank websites. Google ranks web pages. And that's important to remember too, because this is a factor on a page-by-page basis. So you can't just optimize your homepage for speed and think you're done. You really have to worry about all your pages. But it's these 3 web core vitals that matter, because that's how Google can objectively measure speed without using a stopwatch, and without considering that some people are on 3G and a mobile phone, and some people are on Gigafiber on a desktop system with the latest processor and a ton of RAM, and not using Chrome.
Hey,
If you've got those other things, you can still, you know.
Right, yeah, exactly. So the focus on the 3 web core vitals, or core web vitals, they're used, the terminology is kind of used. In fact, as of January, they're replacing one of the core web vitals with a different core web vital. But the best place to get the definitive resource on this is web.dev/vitals. So that will explain the 3, including the one that's being replaced, and what has to be done on each page of the website to ensure you can pass the web core vital test. What does pass mean? Well, each one of these 3 web core vital metrics has a different metric, and they've divided these into 3 categories: red, yellow, green. Green means if you achieve a green score on each of the web core vitals, you will actually get, Google say, a ranking boost. To what extent, we don't really know. But the green gives you an advantage of some sort. Yellow means you are no advantage. Not terrible, but it could be better. Red means a lot of room for improvement, maybe a little disadvantage. So how do we know what the web core vitals are? Well, we can go in with every single page of our website. Number one, we can use the Page Speed Insights tool from Google, which again, is page speed, it's a little misleading. And we can look for the scores for the 3 web core vitals. 2, we can open up our Chrome browser and you can use Chrome developer tools and it will tell you the score for each of the web core vitals. So that's how you do it without like a developer site where it's hidden. 3, if the site is live, your Search Console will give you the web core vitals for all your pages, each page individually. And what it does something really nice. It actually says, okay, these pages seem to be built on the same template, and it's going to say, it assumes that a template, if you improve a template, you will improve all those pages, which is probably true. You know, sometimes you can have extraordinarily large image on a page, and that might be a poor performing page on an otherwise good template. And so image, as it relates to page speed, does affect page speed, because if you got a 10 megabyte image, it's got to download all that, whether or not. And then there's the other thing is one with images is one of the 3 core web vitals is called content layout shift, CLS. And what that is, it's honestly not even a page speed thing. It's something where when you load a page, Google does not want to see it shift immediately on loading. And what you have to do is you have to tell Google before the image loads what the size of the container that has the image will be. So that's why we go into websites and we'll optimize images and say, okay, this container is 816 pixels wide. We're going to shrink the image down to 816 pixels. That way the content layout shift doesn't happen, as long as the template's coded to say this container is 816 pixels wide and tall, whatever that aspect ratio is. So now I say all that to say, remember, Google is mobile first in its index at this point. So it's evaluating the mobile versions of our pages to decide whether it wants to rank the page. So when it comes to speed and web core vitals, we really are looking at the mobile web core vitals score. And that, to get a good mobile web core vital score, typically the best way to do it is how you decide to design a site. By starting with the mobile version first and building up to desktop, you will end up having a better performing website, web page with the web core vitals. But if you start from desktop and you break it down and only show things on mobile, what ends up happening is those big things on the desktop might end up still loading in the background. We don't see them on mobile, but they have to load on mobile. And that's how you get bad mobile web core vital scores, because you're kind of hiding or removing or turning on the hidden element, and it really is there. It's just not hidden. It would be, and from a coding perspective, what that means is in a default style sheet, the style sheet without the media queries should load the mobile version of the site. The media query should say, oh, and if it's a bigger version, then do this. And that's part of mobile first web design. And a lot of developers kind of are so used to thinking of desktop first. And sometimes even clients will say, I don't even want a mobile website, but we know we have to give it to them, right? And so what we'll do is we'll show them the desktop and they'll approve that. And then we go to mobile at that, because that's how our processes are built. But in reality, what we should be doing, even if the client doesn't care or want the mobile, we should start with the mobile and then show them that you build it up to the desktop. And what will happen is consequently just that new way of thinking about the site, it will be a better performing page speed web core vitals website because of that fundamental shift in how we think about designing a page. And so in summary, mobile first means mobile design for the 3 core web vitals, which aren't necessarily really about speed, but specific measurements of specific things on a web page. Does that help?
Yes, definitely.
Do you have any questions?
I think I need to read further before I can get some questions going. So I think I have a very good starting point.
Okay. Brian, as another developer on do you have any thoughts, questions, arguments?
No, I'm good. If Dave's good, I'm good too.
I got a couple of thoughts.
Mhm.
One is like some of the SEO stuff that I've looked at before. We went through like the ClickMinded course, which was really good.
Yeah.
One of the things that they were talking about is when you go to like some of those page speeds and stuff like that, you try to go for something that's at least like good. To try to get something like at the really, really high part could take a ton and a lot of effort that may not be necessary. And I think the reason is because, as David said, page speed is only one of the concerns. So you could be spending, so I think when it comes to all these ranking factors, if you focus your energy and your time on just one thing, you could be ignoring the other ones to your peril as well.
Right.
There was also, I mean, you can look at some of the high ranking websites for things. You look and their vitals aren't very good at all. Right. So it's like, take all of that, how much importance you put on that with a grain of salt. And so that's why they talked about just getting it to be where it's like good, not like amazing, just to where it's good. And the other thing too, I think to consider is it's the user experience. You want to make sure that things are fast enough so it's not inhibiting somebody from or putting something in their way to want to make a conversion. Right. So like if it's a 5-second page load, well, and it takes them 5 seconds to interact with your site, that's probably not a good thing at all. But if it's like 2.1 or 3 and Google still doesn't give you the A, well, it may be good enough, and move on to other things.
Yeah, the statistic, I wish I could quote the actual statistic. Pardon me. But the faster a web page, we got web page, not site, web page loads, the higher the conversion rate.
Yeah.
And there is an absolute correlation.
Yeah. And probably at some point it'd be interesting to see what the graph is, because probably at some point, if you go from 1.5 to 1 seconds, well, it probably doesn't make any difference. But there's probably some points where it really does.
Right.
Probably see a steep drop off.
Yeah.
Like, and I know sometimes, like, especially if you're on mobile, when I'm doing it, if it takes a while, in my mind, I've got a bad connection. I need to wait, and then I've forgotten it.
Yeah.
When it actually could just be the website.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about too, Trisha, related to that is, it all has to start with who's your ideal client, and part of that is, if most of the people that are buying your stuff are in areas where they've got good internet connection, well, it may be less of a worry than if you're selling, feed for cows well, chances are people might be looking at that and they don't have as good an internet connection.
That's true.
Lydia, have you played with this before?
I have, absolutely. I am optimizing my sites. It's very interesting what you said, and that's the truth. When I was first doing training, they would explain mobile first. This is not what I do actually, and it's I will try to think about how that could be changed.
I think, oh, go ahead, finish.
Yeah, I'm always
Oh.
showing the desktop first and perfect
Mhm.
the desktop, because for me that's more complex design wise.
Yeah.
And then I make it look good on mobile.
Yeah.
I think that's how a
yeah.
lot of people, because that's the way it's always been, and mobile is then become more used, and where Google is doing mobile first. But so I think a lot of designers still do it that way. I think only, you know, people, some are starting to change. I've gotten away from designing sites, but the ones I last did, it was desktop first. So I can understand. It's hard to change that process because that's a big change.
Well, and I like introducing the concept of mobile first because I've seen good developers deliver websites to me. And they even go to the point where they worry about content layout shift. And they said, well, the image on the mobile version is only 200 pixels wide. And a desktop version, it's 800. And to create this beautiful mobile version, they were loading both images at the same time. And, you know, it's like, oh my God, like, oh, it took us a long time to figure out why it was underperforming speed wise. And then we realized, oh no, you're loading both images. You have a beautiful mobile design. You got the right, you're loading the image on it wasn't loading the image. He was using that image here, but still the other one was having to load. He was loading two images at once, which made it even slower, you know. But that's why I want to think about it that way, because I'm not a developer. I've created my own WordPress theme and I know a little bit, but you know, I find that whenever I write up a spec for a developer, there's usually another way of thinking about it that I don't know about, that I have to add later because that was a poor development decision. So I have somewhere in Curious Ants like a series of guidelines for new website builds and stuff like that. And I keep them updated because inevitably every time a new website gets launched, it's like, oh, I didn't know you could even do that, or that you would even want to do that. And now it's a new don't do this on the list thing. But anyway, I hope that helps. But I think I completely agree with Dave. Getting at least to a reasonably good score, and I say reasonably good is the high yellows, is bare minimum out the door. When we're using content management systems like WordPress, it can be even harder because there's a lot of bloat, a lot of extra things going on, extra JavaScript being loaded that you don't know about by plugins. But if you're building a from scratch site, somehow it's a lot easier because you are in complete control of everything that loads up. But yeah, it's not the only thing. It is a thing, but it's still a thing that we should consider.
Yeah, yeah, I would be, we do not do mobile first. And Brian, you and I have talked about that. And I think we need to revisit that and actually how to do it.
Mm.
Because
You start the design. Sorry, do you mean like we start the design on mobile?
well, yeah, but then how do you, because clients, they're in love with desktop.
That's how they want to look at
Yeah,
it.
and then
Yeah, and so then how do
Yeah.
you like transform it? Does that mean we have to do two different designs? so to speak. I'm not sure. And then practically, as far as implementation goes, it's one thing to do design, but then to do the implementation where it's mobile first. That's a whole nother thing we have to think about.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I
and
think
I think there's a couple ways I've seen it done
Uh,
well, where clients always, every iteration of the design phase, they're receiving a mobile and desktop version. So during the design phase, the designers are thinking about both versions consecutively,
Yeah,
or concurrently, I should say. And so, yeah, the client might focus on the desktop design and have most of their input on that. By presenting them both, you as the designer are inherently thinking, okay, you'll change this on the desktop. How does that affect the mobile design? And then we fix the mobile design so that it would work on the desk. But I've seen it done well that way. The other way to do it is just not is work from a mobile first perspective, but show them the desktop version only. Because we're talking responsive website builds, right? We're not talking about two different versions. With a responsive website, it should be virtually the same content on mobile as desktop. It's just how it's arranged, right?
Well,
yeah. So in a lot of ways, then it's that, but then it's the implementation that is ends up being different.
it's like
that is the truth, and
um
I sometimes have a
that-
feeling that I don't spend enough time on mobile, so it suffers, whereas it's very important how the site looks on it. I mean, I make them decent,
Yeah.
but I don't spend nearly as much time thinking about mobile as I do for
Well,
desktop.
One thing that helps is to go into your Google Analytics if it's an existing site and see how much traffic is mobile versus desktop. I'd suggest most of the time it's 50-50.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
it
It
can-
will.
if-
It can
I can
depend. It can
share.
depend upon the page too.
Yes.
Go ahead, Brian.
I think what's hard there, like especially if you do remember like the nightmare project that we've had, Dave, before. Not gonna go into details, but remember that nightmare project where there's like
Which
a
one?
difference. there's only like that one thing where there's like the filter is different. It's like it looks different on mobile as opposed to desktop. So what I did
is
there
the
was
what's the domain name start with? What letter? Don't say W.
P. It's like, did I say the letter? It's recorded right there.
That's
It's
fine.
recorded.
That's fine.
Anyway, but it's the plant thing. But anyway, so like at least from my perspective, the way I think about things when building website is they are like a series of boxes that are stacked on top of each other. So suppose you have like the phone number on top. It's basically like a box that contains the phone number text and then followed by say your logo on the left side, which is a box that contains your logo, and then the menu on the right side, which is another box. So how it behaves on mobile is that like when you as you like make the screen size smaller, the boxes just stack on top of each other unless they're overridden by like a JavaScript or CSS. But by default, the behavior is that they stack on top of each other. So that's how it's supposed to, or that's how it works.
Oh, did you?
Now the problem.
I was gonna say when you said first letter, did you say you said P as in Paul or V as in Victor?
P as in Paul.
Yeah. Okay. Now I got it. Okay. Now I'm following. I'm following you.
I'm not sure. I was not sure. Like,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. Well, that's very what made it difficult is that considering what I just described earlier, where elements on a website are like if you imagine it, it's actually like boxes stacked on top of each other. So suppose you have like the phone number on mobile on the first row. and then suddenly your client wants it to be like the fourth row on desktop. That's where things gets complicated. It's like you either add some CSS override that most likely will end up into problems in the future, or like move things around with JavaScript, or create a duplicate section that has the same content where you just hide one section on mobile, show the other section on desktop, vice versa. So that's what we did with the filters, where it's actually like two containers that has the same set of filters. It's just that like you hide the other one from desktop, show the other one on mobile. So that's where things gets tough when like you do totally different layouts on mobile and desktop sometimes. So that's just like yeah, something to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like
Well, you know why I
silence
don't
is
do
really
website
complicated.
development. I let all of y'all do it.
And then if you remember, I'm not sure if like all of us remember, but remember like I'm not sure if it's still a thing, but Google before launched the AMP thingy, where it's supposed to like create a super fast mobile version of your website using their JS, where it strips your website of like unnecessary quote unquote float. But I didn't think it did fly that well because
Yeah,
I
I
don't see
think I
it
know
anymore.
what you're talking
AMP.
about.
It's called AMP.
Yeah, AMP.
Okay.
AMP.
Where
Yeah.
before I remember before they tag websites with AMP, like if you look at the search console, then it says AMP thingy, or yeah, but now it's not. They're not doing it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It was what the lessons learned from AMP are valuable because the fact. So a while back, Google had this certification called the Mobile Website Developer Certification. It's an
Yeah, I
excellent
remember.
certification. I took it a couple times. And one of the things it talked about was how the fastest element to load on a web page is the element that doesn't live on the web page. In other words, is it so worth having that slider box at the top of your page that you're willing to have a slow website?
Yeah.
Is this widget that the client's adamant about so valuable that they'd be willing to sacrifice conversion rate because the website takes forever to load? And so much of the web developer certification that Google used to offer was about psychology of how do you explain to your boss that you can't have everything on the page? And that's what AMP was really good, because AMP basically trimmed the site so that you really were bare bones.
Right.
And I think that's why people didn't like it, because they're like, oh, but we have to have this very complicated pricing widget and a slider and, all kinds of fancy things. No, I mean, the bigger the company you work with, the more people put their fingers in a website, and the harder it is to actually build. Right?
I think it's with everything.
That's true. Website by committee usually is
Yeah.
pretty poor.
Try under getting a social post, 4 posts with images taking 3 months and never getting approved.
Yeah, I'm working with a client right now, and I'm begging
Check the
them, like,
text they already have.
please only allow 2 people to weigh in on this website, or you'll never launch.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just
Yeah.
ask. No, don't ask anybody else. Nobody else gets to at you. You tell them this is what they're getting. You're the boss. Stop asking people. Listen to me. Oh, they do. All right. Well, now does everybody come sufficiently discouraged about their mobile speeds on their web pages? Frustrated with their complete new way of having to do web design that changes everything that you're used to.
Yeah.
Everybody
stuff-
hates
this
David
meeting
and his
sucks.
damn suggestions. David just sits here in the ivory tower and says what what you should do, but doesn't have to live with the consequences of it.
Yeah, it's not the meeting sucks. You suck.
Yeah, blame David. Yeah,
No,
kill the
Nala, that was a
messenger.
good question. That was
Yeah.
a good question.
Yeah, I was taking notes because I know we've talked about this, but like having the whole for Core Web Vitals build for mobile first. I don't know that that's really stuck before, but for some reason, like that part of it,
Right.
I now has registered. Of course, I don't build websites, but you know, when I talk to clients who are having them built, that it would be useful for that part.
Good.